Oscar Wilde. I think of him as like a patron saint of the English language. But the thing is, he was Irish, not English. Like he was Irish and he only ever wrote one novel. The Importance of Being Earnest was a play. Ravenna was poetry. De Profundis, I guess, is like an essay, the one he wrote in prison. And The Picture of Dorian Gray, his one and only novel. And welcome to Reading for Idiots, a channel where I read books and I also review books, and it's all for the purpose of spreading the joys of reading. You can find me reading live on Twitch every Saturday and Sunday at 4:30 p.m. GMT +8. That is actually where I read this book, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and I'll put a link to my videos of them down below. I publish a new reading-related video every Wednesday, and every fortnight it is a no-spoiler review because that's how long it takes me to read a book, to write the review, to record the review, edit it, and upload it. And so every other fortnight, I publish a reading-related video like the one I've linked down below, 5 unusual, rare, and beautiful words. And today's no-spoiler review is actually a really short book. It's only about 200 pages long, and the story is also very simple, but man, it packs a profound moral and psychological punch. Not to even mention Oscar Wilde's characteristic use of language, which, by the way, if you didn't already know, is beautiful. But I'll get to that more later on in the video when I'll show you exactly just how gorgeous and witty his prose is. But back quickly to how simple the story of The Picture of Dorian Gray is. Personally speaking, and I don't know about you, please let me know down below, but personally speaking, I much prefer a simple narrative as opposed to these recent Marvel monstrosities where 3 movies are crammed into one movie and this guy is that guy something and that's a callback to that chick which sets this up later on in the film, and it's whatever, exhausting. Instead, The Picture of Dorian Gray is incisive. It gets to the point, and man, what a point it is, and yet it somehow also manages to smell the flowers along the way. Welcome to my no-spoiler review of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Like, share, subscribe. Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde was born on the 16th of October, 1854 in Dublin, Ireland. Sorry for that. He was the son of a prominent eye surgeon, Sir William Wilde, and Jane Wilde, who was a poet and an advocate for Irish nationalism. And of course, Oscar was a precocious kid. He learned to speak fluently French and German as a youth before he went on to distinguish himself as a classicist, first at Trinity College Dublin and then at Magdalen College Oxford, where he started to develop his characteristic flamboyant and witty style. He later on became a leading figure in the aesthetic movement, which kind of promoted art for art's sake. And socially, he was known for his flamboyant style, like his flamboyant sense of fashion, his witty conversations, banter, and for his sharp critiques on Victorian society. The decade of the 1890s was when Oscar Wilde really was at the height of his career, and it all began in the year 1890 when The Picture of Dorian Gray was published. And published it was to much controversy, not just because it went against the grain of hoity-toity Victorian moralism by indulging in its hedonism, not just in its content, what actually happens in the book, but also in the way it was written too. It also skirted homosexuality, which in Victorian society was a big no-no. But it's so well done. These gay allusions are so well done because it's kind of there, kind of not. So yeah, very controversial, but nonetheless an instant classic. He follows up the picture of Dorian Gray with a couple of plays. In 1892, it was Lady Windermere's Fan, and in 1895, probably his most famous play, The Importance of Being Earnest. Hoity-toity Victorian moralism bit back though, because in 1895, he was arrested and he was convicted of gross indecency, basically for being gay. Anyway, Oscar Wilde was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. Just as an aside, persecution and discrimination notwithstanding, how Oscar Wilde ended up in prison is super interesting. He was in a relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas, and it was a kind of relationship that was like argument, reconciliation, but they loved each other deeply. But the thing is, Oscar Wilde got into a scandalous public feud with Douglas's dad, the Marquess of Queensberry. He called Oscar Wilde a posing sodomite. And then, in 1895, at the top of his career, the year The Importance of Being Earnest was published, Oscar Wilde sued the Marquess of Queensberry for libel, which was a bad idea because at the trial, Oscar Wilde's homosexuality was revealed, i.e., he was a sodomite. Unjust, totally though it is, how very, very tragically ironic, and how so very, very Oscar Wilde. While in prison in 1897, Wilde wrote De Profundis, From the Depths, which many consider to be his magnum opus, which is really saying something for someone who wrote so many magna opera. So then after 2 years of hard labor, he gets out of prison, right? But he's destitute and he's alone, and he moves to France to escape the hounds of British society. Lord Alfred Douglas shuns him. There is no final reconciliation. And he dies in disgrace of meningitis on November 30th, 1900, alone, at the age of 46. Oscar Wilde's life, I think, is beautifully summed up by Lord Darlington's famous line in Lady Windermere's Fan. Cecil Graham accuses Lord Darlington of being in the gutter for going against these hoity-toity Victorian morals. And Lord Darlington simply replies, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars." So we all know the story of the picture of Dorian Gray, right? Dorian Gray is a young, gorgeous, impressionable kid from an aristocratic family, and he is having his portrait painted by Basil Hallward when in walks Lord Henry Wotton, witty, hedonistic, idiosyncratic. And I'm just thinking, that is so Oscar Wilde, but I picture him as Stephen Fry. And already under Wotton's spell, so to speak, or such was Lord Henry Wotton's influence, or such was Dorian Gray's impressionability, that Dorian wishes that he could remain young forever and in his place have his portrait age instead. And by the end of chapter 2, all the important characters introduced, the premise is set up, boom, no Marvel shenanigans. And Dorian then proceeds to live this totally awesome life of pleasure and self-indulgence and sin. And the thing is, Dorian doesn't just do bad things, but he gets other people to do bad things too. He corrupts them. Kind of like how Lord Henry Wotton corrupted him, we could say. This novel, a gothic horror classic, was first published in Lippincott's monthly magazine, July issue 1890. And for all its beautiful language and well-paced and well-structured story, The Picture of Dorian Gray is essentially a philosophical work. The Picture of Dorian Gray, plain face, asks the question, what if we just did whatever the hell we want without consequences, without fear of consequences? And what is the cost of that on our soul, for lack of a better word? How do these societal values, well, actually, no, what's the point in these societal values when all they do is just create or superficially manifest in stifling rules? What's the point of these values? And how do they affect our day-to-day lives? Like, how do they affect the choices we make every day? And relationships, for that matter. Like, what if we had no social, no moral obligations to another person? Hell, not even to ourselves. Like, for instance, say we're supposed to meet Charlotte for a coffee tomorrow, but instead we're just like, fuck her, fuck it, and fuck me. I'm just gonna go on a 4-day bender. How does that affect our relationships? And then, in turn, how do those relationships end up affecting us? What happens if we just give the world one big fuck it all and lived exactly for the pursuit of pleasure, maximizing our individual freedom at every point? What happens to our lives then? Well, in just under or maybe just over 200 pages, you will see exactly what happens to Dorian Gray. The thing is, the picture of Dorian Gray is far from a book that says, "Thou shalt not," and then ends with "and they lived happily ever after." It's filled with nuance. It critiques social values on the surface, but also it somehow shows how they're necessary. It hails the beauty of aestheticism and pleasure, but also warns of the extremes of worshipping them. It is a complex book, and I dare say maybe a little bit misunderstood. It's not a cautionary tale, as so many people seem to say. At least not in my reading. And the extent of its complexity is reflected in the language. The gorgeous use of language and wit by Oscar Wilde. There is a fatality about all physical and intellectual distinction, the sort of fatality that seems to dog through history the faltering steps of kings. It is better not to be different from one's fellows. The ugly and the stupid have the best of it in this world. They can sit at their ease and gape at play. If they know nothing of victory, they are at least spared the knowledge of defeat. What the hell did I just read? But it's beautiful, right? But what are you trying to tell me, Oscar Wilde? That ignorance is bliss? And I should just be dead, dull, and dumb like everybody else? Or is Lord Henry Wotton goading Dorian, challenging him, daring him to be great and to suffer for it? And what about this? The only artists I have ever known who are personally delightful are bad artists. Good artists simply exist in what they make and consequently are perfectly uninteresting in what they are. A great poet, a really great poet, is the most unpoetical of all creatures, but inferior poets are absolutely fascinating. The worse their rhymes are, the more picturesque they look. The mere fact of having published a book of second-rate sonnets makes a man quite irresistible. He lives the poetry he cannot write. The others write the poetry they dare not realize. I mean, clearly it's provocative and partly in jest, but how much truth is there in that kind of truism? Actually, does it even matter when it's so beautifully put? Is there no value in and of itself in the eloquence? Because it could just be nonsense, right? Anyway, you should definitely read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, if only for the pure pleasure of reading it. And if you heard me say that, thank you so much for watching until the end. Please like this video, smash that button, share it with all of your friends that you think would enjoy it, because it makes all the difference to me as a small channel. And if there are any books you want me to read and then review, let me know down below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.
Like, share, subscribe.